Welcome to Lifetime Talks and our series on performance and longevity with MIORA. I'm Jamie Martin. I'm here with Jim LaValle, Lifetime's Chief Science Officer. And in this episode, we are talking about brain health and mental acuity and cognition. And just like our bodies, our brains undergo many changes as we age and experience various health issues. In this episode, we're exploring the key factors that affect our cognitive health, the various biomarkers that can tell us about our brain health, and strategies for optimizing our mental acuity. Hey, Jim, how's it going?
Going great.
All right, we're diving in on this mental sharpness piece.
I know. And we both remembered each other's names. This is a great start.
I have been known to maybe say the wrong name from time to time, so I'm glad we started on a good note. Okay. All right, so brain health and cognitive health. What does it mean to have mental acuity? What does that why does it matter for health?
Yeah. Well, mental acuity could be different for different people, right? I mean, all of us have maybe a different capacity, like an IQ, where maybe you can learn something
Right.
quicker. When you think of mental acuity, am I performing my tasks easily? Remembering what I need to do. Am I focused? And of course, that brings into the whole aspect of, well, what about people with attention deficit? A little bit different. So, we can cross into that.
Yep.
But, most people understand when their brain is sharp, meaning they're thinking clearly, they're remembering what's on the list, they're not processing slowly, kind of that foggy brain that a lot of people talk about. So, mental acuity and focus is how we should be,
Mhm.
even if we have attention deficit,
Okay.
right? I mean, that's not, it's just another category where your neurotransmitters might be off a little bit, and therefore you can work towards kind of reestablishing that balance. But
Yep.
focus and acuity, it's, hey, I'm alert. I can respond to things. For example, reaction time, I would put as a part of brain health.
Yeah,
Right? And so those are the key components to it.
love it. So what are the factors that can affect it? Maybe not for the better.
Yeah, well, I mean, so there's two ways to look at it. So just like problems with glucose regulation is probably the number one thing
Okay.
that causes a problem with brain health in the future, right? Dementia, Alzheimer's considered type 3
Yeah.
diabetes, and there's a reason for that we'll get into. So making sure you're regulating your blood sugar is a big part of mental health. And the other components would be, well, where's my immune system functioning at? Because neuroinflammation, so you have an immune system that's driven by what's called microglial cells, or the big immune cells of the brain. When they're triggered and activated, you create more inflammation. Inflammation, you know, destroys neurons, basically. The
Yes.
neurons get broken down. And so that part is important to keep in mind. Hearing loss is incredibly important. And that's now being tied to risk for dementia as well. Stress, once again, what can you do to maintain good mental acuity? Manage your cortisol curve,
Mhm.
understand your stress response, because it turns out that, as you're under chronic stress and your cortisol levels are higher,
Mm.
it stimulates more of that neuroinflammation. But more importantly, what cortisol does is it blocks the ability of your stem cells to grow into mature neurons.
Oh, interesting. So
So
it's
you
gonna
can't
stop it.
renew things,
Got
it
it.
blocks it. So usually you'll grow a neuron and it takes about 2 to 4 weeks from a stem cell, right?
Okay.
You get what's called a progenitor cell. The problem is that cortisol sticks to that progenitor cell and says, you're not growing.
Mm.
And then the other thing that happens when you're under stress, because your brain's the commander in chief, right?
Yep.
If it feels a threat, like too much cortisol coursing through the brain, literally you'll get something called dendritic retraction. The neurons will retract in and you'll lose surface area of those neurons being able to communicate with each other.
Mm.
And so that stress component is really big. And then there's other things that can affect cognition. I mean, we've all heard about lead and lead lowering IQs, right? So
Yep.
children in lower income areas have leaded paint on the walls and they would eat lead chips, for example. It's actually a lot of publication that's directly related to environmental burden,
Yep.
like lead, having an impact directly on just your IQ, your ability to process and problem solve, because that's a part of it. Acuity, focus, problem solving, that's where we want to be,
Yep.
right? And so environmental burden could do that from a variety of sources, and infection could do that. A lot of, for example, COVID long haulers complain of being cognitively foggy,
Yes.
and that's because increased inflammatory cytokines, triggering the neuroinflammation in the brain, losing mitochondrial capacity in the brain, and the mitochondria are the powerhouses of every cell.
Yeah.
And that can generate the problem of, I'm thinking foggy headed, too much glutamate, too much histamine. I'm not clearing it. So probably one of the things that a lot of people don't know about, because it really wasn't even discovered until about 7 or 8 years ago, maybe a little longer than that,
Okay.
is the glymphatic system.
Okay.
So glial, lymphatic system.
Hmm.
What role does that play? Well, just like every other tissue in your body, your brain has waste products of its metabolism. And it has to get rid of those. It has to transport those out and clear the brain out so that when you go to sleep at night and get that restful sleep that I know we all get,
Yes.
you're basically refilling the pools of those neurotransmitters and resetting the brain for the next day. How does your lymphatic system get optimized? Well, one is sleep.
Yep.
So sleep is incredibly important for the lymphatic system functioning. But the other piece that's important is exercise. It turns out that exercise is incredibly important in lymphatic function. And, when people travel out of time zones, or you hear about night shift workers,
Yes.
right? Night shift workers have higher all-cause mortality. That's because our brain's circadian rhythm, we talked about the master slave clock in a previous episode. Our brain's circadian rhythm, it's supposed to have that repair process going on at night when you sleep. Well, if you're awake, the natural rhythm of what your body's signaling to do is disrupted.
It's out of sync, right?
Exactly.
Goes
It's
out
out
of
of
sync.
sync. And
Yep.
so those are just a few things that can cause a problem. Obviously, just being under excess sympathetic duress will also lead to problems, as we all know. When you're under, long-term stress, most people will start to see a change in their short-term memory.
Okay, that makes sense. One thing that's you hear a lot about is that we can build those neural pathways. Like there used to be the thinking that it was at a certain time in your life that you're building neural pathways. That's been debunked. We now know that you can build neural pathways as you learn new things. What I heard you say too is like kind of as, when you have cortisol or what the other, now I'm not going to remember the exact thing you said, but that can get shut down based on certain stressors, right? Things happening, some of these different factors that may affect
Exactly.
it. Okay.
No, that's exactly right.
Okay.
You should be able to continue to build neural pathways and be sharp as you're aging.
Yes.
That's what we should be doing.
Okay.
You just have to remember that the more neuroinflammation, and that can happen from a head
Mm.
trauma,
Right.
right? You could, when people get over the age of 65, for example, the older in life, and you fall and you hit your head, that can cause real acceleration of neurologic damage.
Mm.
Because when you have a TBI,
Yeah.
and that can happen from a car wreck, that can happen from hitting your head on a cabinet. Obviously, it can happen from a fall. And it doesn't always have to be, it's called the shearing force. It doesn't have to be, oh, I hit my head directly on a concrete block. It could be at the angle that it hits,
Right.
triggers that microglial activation. And it's interesting,
Mm.
when you hit your head and have a traumatic brain injury like a concussion, and look, concussions, think how common those are
So
in
common. Yeah.
tweens, teens, sports. It's very common, right?
Yeah.
Your gut gets permeable within 2 hours of hitting your head.
Yes.
So then what you have, as one of your strategies to think of, is you have a nervous system that connects the gut to the brain. And there's been literature saying that, hey, as dementia a problem sourced in the gut? Well, it's a two-way communication system. So
Right.
it could be that it's sourced from the gut. And you just have to remember that the gut immune brain connection through the enteric nervous system that connects the gut and the brain directly
Yep.
is in a bidirectional communication. So if the gut's bad, the brain's getting signals that are in pro-inflammatory. And if the brain is pro-inflammatory, it's sending those signals to the gut. And so we don't think about gut health for the brain, but if you look at all the literature that's been coming out, there's been so much coming out about that really in-depth connection between the gut and the brain. So that's one of those areas that a lot of people don't think about. They always think, hey, it's about the brain. And somehow or another, your head is disconnected from the rest of your body, right? When we think
Right.
about it, right? That's how it was for a long time. Now we're understanding more and more that, you know what? It's just another vital organ, commander in chief,
Hmm.
that is connected to every other organ system in your body and is influenced by that.
Yes. It's the body is a fascinating thing, right? Like, just, you always hear things like, "Oh, the things can't pass through the blood-brain barrier," but then you hear things like this, like the enteric nervous system that you talked about, that connection and how it's, you think about the vagal nerve and those different ways that that's connected all the way down into every piece of your body, every
That's right.
area. So,
And we now know that the blood-brain barrier does get permeable,
mhm.
and things like lipopolysaccharide, which gets derived from the gut microbiome dying off and the particles off the bugs are lipopolysaccharide,
Yep.
and they can go across the blood-brain barrier. And actually, that's the current thought process as to what's going on with Alzheimer's dementia,
Mm.
is that lipopolysaccharide, which is going up due to your gut being off, people with diabetes tend to have higher lipopolysaccharide. So that kind of
Mhm.
creates that connection between people with diabetes and developing more dementia, right?
Right.
So when lipopolysaccharide goes up, that triggers a response.
Mm.
Like your brain says, wait a second, we need to regulate that inflammation signal. And so it makes a compound called galectin 3.
Okay.
And galectin 3 is supposed to quell the inflammation. But the problem is, if it's ongoing, the galectin 3 actually ends up, because of it's unopposed, it just keeps being released. It accelerates the inflammation and creates more damage. And so there's really good research out now. Actually, there's a investigational drug out that blocks galectin 3, and they're finding out that it's reversing the mild and moderate dementia and getting people's memory back. So it goes back to that whole thing of understanding that all of your body systems are connected. And brain health, yes, we could talk about ginkgo and we can talk about SPMs and fish oil and
Yeah.
ginsenoside R3 and all sorts of things that can help. But you still have to get back to, how am I managing all my body systems?
Right. Well, because to that point, you can't separate anything.
That's right.
All right. So what are some of the cognitive issues that people may experience? Like, and what are the solutions that are available to them? Because it can feel like when people aren't functioning at their best, whether it's they're moving towards that, whether it's a neurodegenerative disease or it's just I'm in my daily life, I'm walking through life in a fog. What are some things that we can do to start moving forward towards down a healthier path?
Sure. So the first one's get your blood sugar under control, right?
Yep.
Because people that have swings in their blood sugar will feel foggy and crash midday. Same thing will happen with inappropriate cortisol
Mhm.
response. People will feel more foggy headed,
Yep.
short term memory loss. It turns out that, get your sex hormones evaluated.
Mm.
Estradiol in women in particular, incredibly important for brain health. It actually helps the two hemispheres of the brain communicate.
Mm.
And you'll when I know, one of my institutes that I was in, I had an OB-GYN there that, we would talk about this a lot, and I'd see a lot of women patients, and I would talk to a woman who enters menopause, and they would say, "It's like a switch turned off in my brain, and I became a different person."
Mm. Yep.
And then you restore their hormone balance, and they're, "Oh, I'm back to feeling more calm. I'm back to having a restful night's sleep. I'm not as agitated anymore."
Hmm.
So, one of the strategies is, depending on age, stage of life, thinking of hormone balance is important.
Yep.
Glucose and cortisol is important.
Yep.
And then it's, well, what can you do to help quiet that neuroinflammatory signal? And one of the big ones is, managing that stress response. So things like theanine,
Yep.
which is really good for managing anxiety, really helps to, because what it does, it blocks glutamate. And glutamate's what's called an excitotoxin, right?
Yep.
It's an excitatory neurochemical. And glutamate is one of the things that help prevent those progenitor cells from progressing to new neurons and making new neural networks, right?
Right.
And so theanine, really valuable. The other one, Relora, very valuable, because if you can manage stress, your brain will get calmer, you'll think more clearly. When we start to get into, well, what can you take specifically,
Right.
right? One of the things that we did research on, we actually did it with Corvette race team to improve their reaction time and cognitive focus when they were racing around a track, was we developed a ginsenoside called R3. So ginseng has a bunch of different ginsenosides.
Okay.
One of them is R3. It's very small. When we gave it to Corvette race drivers, because we measured their brain coherence as they were running around the racetrack, and we found out as their core body temperature went up, their reaction times got worse. And that's why they weren't winning Le Mans, and they weren't real happy about that.
Okay.
And so the bottom line was, we found out that, when we give this to individuals, their core body temperature stays normal, their reaction time stays intact. Well, then we've since been doing that research on looking at, people with TBIs, folks that get a concussion that may be in his professional sport.
Right.
And it turns out that when you look at all the research on ginsenoside R3, that it helps to quiet microglial cell activity. So pretty impressive. The other ones are, specialized fish oils called SPMs. And these fish oils help with improving what's called resolvins in your brain, so that it helps to quiet the inflammatory rush that occurs when you first get, a head trauma, or your brain is just under a chronic neuroinflammatory state. So SPMs can be valuable. You hear a lot about, certain mushrooms like lion's mane.
Yeah.
Same thing, supporting immune function, reducing that neuroinflammation. Something as simple as magnesium has a dramatic role to play, because it improves circulation and helps with the parasympathetic nervous system, which reduces that inflammatory signal. And then the standbys that a lot of people go to, things like, ginkgo, rich history of helping cognitive support. Why? Because it improves circulation. And so, circulatory effects, I know, a few of the things that we utilize at MIORA, Kyolic aged garlic extract helps with blood flow. So it helps to improve the pliability of your arteries and blood vessels. And so you see improvement in circulation. Revasca, another combination of glycosaminoglycans. And I know, I love saying those big words once in a while.
You see my eyes get big.
They just come up so easy, right? Just like glycosaminoglycans. I just want to say it 3 times real fast. So anyway, but also, it has seaweed and some nitric oxide producing compounds. Basically what that is for is to help improve microcapillary blood flow.
Got it.
Because it's all about getting oxygen to your brain.
Right.
And it's all about utilizing glucose efficiently in your brain. So when I have people get on a ketogenic diet and they go, I can't believe how much better that I'm thinking, I'm so clear, for a period of time.
Right.
It works for a while. And that's because when you're on a ketogenic diet, you're no longer feeding into your insulin resistance, and your brain can run on those fats and run on ketones. And for a while, that does a really good job. But then it has its limit to its benefit. But whenever people say that, I go, oh, we really have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
If you felt that dramatic of a difference, right?
Yes.
So it's kind of the brain's one of those things, we can't open it up and look at it.
Right.
It's not the easiest thing to assess, but certainly things like QEEG, putting on the helmet and mapping out the brain. That's a way to look at it. And obviously, these markers that relate to the various aspects of what's going wrong with your chemistry could point you in the direction of, hey, are you having trouble or are you at risk for cognitive loss
Right.
based on where your chemistry's at right now?
Yep. Well, and that really takes us into testing. I want to have one other thing I want to get to before that, though, because you mentioned earlier that exercise plays a really important role in cognitive health. And I think it's worth spending time there because you also just said like you need to kind of open those capillaries, get more oxygen to your brain. Exercise is one way that that happens, right? And there's something called BDNF that I wanted to bring up as well, brain derived neurotrophic factor.
Sure.
Or what role that plays.
Well, yeah, I mean, BDNF, when you keep your progenitor cells moving and you don't have neuroinflammatory responses, you're decreasing the impact on tubulin, you're decreasing the inflammatory compounds, and that allows for the expression of BDNF.
Yeah.
And of course, when we look at the future, there's peptides that stimulate brain-derived neurotropic factor
Yeah.
that I think we're going to see more and more of over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
That'll be coming out. So BDNF is intact when you're not in a neuroinflammatoatory state,
Yep.
right? So that's the important aspect to that.
Okay. I love that BDNF. I'm like, oh, I know that one. We can talk about that for a
They
second.
I thought they made tapes or something. BDNF. No, I don't think it's BDNF though. I think that's BSF.
Probably. Okay, so testing, because like you said, you can't open up the brain and look at that. Like, but what are those specific biomarkers that you mentioned that you would be able to indicate? And I'm sure, like, what is that part of the comprehensive testing that we do at MIORA?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that are going on in the research right now, and it's actually I'm on the advisory board of the lab that's working with Harvard and Yale and doing this metabolomics research, where we're looking at markers of the metabolism. So when your genes get transcripted and they get turned on or suppressed, what is the byproduct? And very shortly, in the next year or two, you're going to be able to look at markers for, does this look like dementia? Does this look like,
Mm,
Alzheimer's? Does this look like Parkinson's? Because we can look and find those markers in the epigenetic set. So for one, that kind of advanced testing is not ready for prime time
right.
yet, but it is in the pipeline. And obviously, I've been very blessed to be able to work with a lot of the companies that are doing leading edge lab research and looking at markers in this area. So pretty excited about that. But I always go back to this core principle of you need to look at what are the baselines of my labs. So for example, if you're hypertensive, you're more at risk for dementia because hypertension means your blood vessels are stiff and you're not getting oxygen to your brain.
Right.
And that's why we talk about getting your morning and evening blood pressures. And, I know a lot of people that just have, modestly high blood pressure and they're like, oh, it's just a little high.
Mm,
And they don't take action on it. And so blood pressure, really important as it relates to cognition.
right.
Um, Glucose and insulin,
Back
that's
to
a
it.
biggie. I mean, it's really big, and all the things that influence glucose and insulin, what
Mhm.
you eat, how you exercise, how much stress you're under, how much sleep are you getting,
Yep.
all of those are important. Sleep apnea, incredibly important. So once again, if you don't say you live alone, so you don't have a partner that says, hey, you stopped breathing,
Yeah.
you can actually get an app that will listen. You put your phone next
Mm,
to your bed and turn it on, and it records your sleeping sounds. So if you listen to that and you're choking in the middle of the night,
right.
you probably ought to go get a sleep apnea test.
Yeah. Go get checked out
Yeah,
sooner than
don't
later.
snore heavy, don't do that. But it's really important. These are things that you can start to do, and you wouldn't need, don't act on your own. Go get checked out. Really
Right.
important. And then things like bad actor lipids or dyslipidemias. So looking at
Yep.
cholesterol, not just because of, oh, is your cholesterol good or bad, but what kind of cholesterol are you making because those subfractions show that you're under metabolic inflammation.
Yeah.
Now, excessive iron.
Mm.
So a lot of people, oh yeah, I'm eating a carnivore diet. I'm eating a lot of meat. You should have your iron levels and ferritin levels checked because iron damages tissues, including the brain, can cross the blood-brain barrier. And then you have things like vectors, so viruses. So what does that look like in terms of labs? Well, what's my CBC with differential look like? We had
Right.
mentioned neutrophils and lymphocytes and monocytes and eosinophils on a previous episode related to the immune system.
Yep.
So we could be looking at that. And then once again, thyroid hormone, is important because people don't feel cognitively as sharp if they're low thyroid,
Yeah.
right? And then another piece to that puzzle would be sex hormones.
Mhm.
For men and women both, it can play an important role in how cognitively sound you feel. And then if we want to complete the puzzle, right? Because
Yep.
we've talked about the gut and we've talked about all these other areas, organs of detoxification like the liver, the kidneys play a role in filtering out, the byproducts of our metabolism and what we get exposed to. And when that's not in balance, we're going to throw off more inflammatory compounds, which are going to lead to more neuroinflammation,
Yep.
which leads to the damage. So this is exactly what happens. Microglial cells get turned on. They release oxidative compounds, superoxide anion, peroxyl nitrite, all these different free radicals. The free radicals damage the neuron. The neuron shrivels up and dies, breaks apart, and releases parts of the neuron
Into your brain.
into your
The
brain.
areas.
So
Okay.
you release, because you hear these terms, if anybody's reading about Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, laminin, neurolaminin, alpha synuclein, all these compounds get released, and guess what they do?
Yep.
They activate your microglial cells more.
So it's
So
just
it's a
this
vicious cycle.
cycle that keeps
That's
happening.
exactly right.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
what you just described really is the foundation of from a testing and looking at the entire system. It's the basis of the metabolic code, right? Like,
That's
because
right.
when you can look at all those pieces, identify and say, like, you can make connections, like you said, and say, okay, these things could be affecting cognition and your brain health overall, right?
That's exactly right.
So what next then? How does somebody, what are the strategies that you then, offer somebody for taking care of their brain health and cognition next? How do we stay sharp?
Well, I love people doing games,
Yeah.
work with puzzles, read books still. Remember, primitive nervous system, modern world. We have a lot of screen time these days.
Yep.
And I think managing screen time, activating your brain in different ways, whether it's through look, exercise is important. Balance and stability sends a signal from your
Yes.
muscles to your brain, right? So those types of exercises can be invaluable. Obviously, working your brain
Yep.
can be invaluable, right?
Yep.
Whether it's Sudoku or puzzles or whatever you want to do. I just did an IQ test. I'm not going to tell you what it was, but the IQ test was all about basically these puzzles and different symbols and how they flip and work into a grid, right?
Okay.
And that's the way they test is your ability to three-dimensionally, spatially look at things and order them correctly. So working that is going to help you maintain mental acuity and mental focus,
Right.
right? So really important that we do that. And then it's look, when you go to MIORA and you get a metabolic code test, it's looking at all these systems of the body and looking at the relationships between those systems and pinpointing where do you need to work because where Jamie might need to get started on working could be different than what Jim needs to do.
Right.
And so therefore work at what's important to you. Remove your metabolic roadblocks so that you can protect brain health.
Yeah.
And then obviously, I still go back, make sure that your home is clean, make sure that you have good air quality, try not to use toxic things in your home. Those are really important too for brain health.
Yep. It really does come down to, what's our environment? And then what are the daily habits and behaviors that we're doing to support our health and well-being, right? Come
That's right.
again, our
Uh,
pillars.
And if I was going to say one thing is get out of living angry.
Mm, that's pretty important.
There's a
Mood.
lot of folks that have a lot of stored anger, and that creates more sympathetic stress. It's really
Mhm.
hard on your heart. It's really hard on your brain. And once again, why do since I came on as this chief science officer for Lifetime, you want to know what's really amazing to me? The importance we place on the Aurora group,
Oh, yeah, our healthy aging.
our healthy aging
Everything.
group. I mean, when our CEO is saying we need to create events so people don't feel isolated, so they feel part of a group and they're wanted, that is so crucial
Yep.
to brain health as you're aging. Because when you look at centenarian cultures where there's high amounts of centenarians,
Yep.
people as they're aging are connected into a community. They feel relevant, they feel heard, their mind is still active. And I think that was one of the most exciting things for me was seeing that importance. It's not just for the young fit person, it's at every stage in life.
Yep.
And that's how you really support brain health all the way through your life,
Yep. Well, I think it's like the importance of connections, right? Real social connections.
right?
Also those connections that are happening in our brain, but those connections support those too. So
Yes,
like
they
let's
do.
maintain those and make sure that we have a place where people can come and do that for one another, right? And create a
Exactly.
space. So,
Yep.
all right, Jim, did I miss anything? Anything you want to
Well,
add as a final thought?
I don't know. I'm getting old. I might have forgot something.
Oh, come on now.
I think
That's
we
not
covered it
gonna
pretty good.
happen. All right. If people want to learn more, they can visit miora.lifetime.life to learn more, not just about brain health, but about all these other facets of health and well being that can influence our longevity and performance. Thanks, Jim.